Hey ladies and gents, welcome to the first of our pre-recorded wine tastings. Lockdown isn't going to stop us from having a bloody good wine tasting, and luckily we have all the components needed to do one. We've got good quality wine, we've got someone who can press record on a video camera, and a colleague who is able to get them to you, or a way of getting the wines to you. So hopefully you've all received your wine pairs delivered by our Hannah's Fair Hands, and we've chosen these particular pairings for a specific reason. Two very similar wines, either in terms of style or in terms of grape varieties. One old world, so European wine, one new world, anywhere other than Europe. So all of you have chosen different wine pairings, and I bet you're thinking, well, I don't want to sit through the whole video, just to get to mine, or maybe you do. They're all really rather good, if I do say so myself. So I've sorted out some handy dandy time codes down in the description down below. You just look for your wine pairing that you want to look at. There's a blue number next to each one. If you click on it, it will take you straight to it immediately, and you don't have to sit through the whole video. So enough chat, let's get started. Old world versus new world, wine pairings, beardy wine guy, let's go. So what's Cava? What is Cava? Is it fake champagne? Is it Spanish champagne? Is it cheap, nasty stuff? Well, none of the above, really. It's its own kind of thing. There's always been a stigma around Cava, and hopefully we'll smash some of the myths about it, and you'll be more open to trying it in the future. It's the world's third largest sparkling wine producer, below Prosecco and Champagne. And it's surprisingly little known and even less well understood. So Prosecco and Champagne have done a much better job of marketing themselves, and there's some historical elements which we won't go into, but basically there was a lot of poor quality Cava going out, and that kind of muddied people's perceptions of how good it can really be. Now Cava is a DO classified wine, short for Denominación de Origen, terrible Spanish pronunciation, but you'll see it on the screen anyway, and it literally means region of origin, which carries a raft of regulations regarding quality. It's a quality system. Now, Spanish DOs identify specific regions generally in Spain, so two big examples are the Rioja DO and the Ribera del Duero. Now Cava's a little bit different, as it can come from lots of different places. Obviously the biggest is an area called Penedès. It's northwest of Barcelona, so it's in the Catalan kind of region. It's a Catalonian wine, but it can also be made in Rioja, in Navarra, in Valencia, and lots of other places as well. The thing that allows it to be called Cava is the grapes that are being used and the method that is used to make it. Here's a fun fact. In the late 19th century, it started to be called Cava because of the translation of the words. I've found a few different translations. One's cave and one is cellar. And basically in and around that area there are lots of limestone. There's lots of limestone, which is perfect for building cellars in. It keeps the wines cool during its processes, essentially. If it gets too warm, then you're going to be getting problems. So Cava, cave, cellar, along those sorts of lines. Now Cava is a blend of generally three different grapes, all indigenous to Spain. So the first being Macabeo, or in Rioja it's known as Viura, and that's, if you're really into your white Rioja, that's what that's made of. Then also there is Parellada, and there's Jarell or Jarello, and those three really do need to be involved. For rosé Cava, they also use Garnacha or Grenache, to give it that lovely pink hue to it and some of those fruity red fruit flavours that are going on. And made using, you can either call it the traditional method or the champenois method. So as you can tell, this was kind of pioneered in the Champagne region. And essentially what it is that it is fermented as usual. So you get your still wine juice, get the juice, go through fermentation, and then what happens is they add some more sugar and yeast after it's gone in the bottle. So you've got your bottle of still wine, a bit of sugar, a bit of yeast, then you seal it up. Now what happens is it goes through a secondary fermentation and it starts to produce carbon dioxide because it's a byproduct of fermentation. It produces that carbon dioxide, and that's where you get your carbonation from. But that isn't all. Also, what happens is, after the yeast have finished doing their thing, they die and they stay in the bottle for a good amount of time, 6 to 8 weeks. What happens there is the yeast die and they kind of burst open because they're single-celled organisms. They burst open, and when they die, they produce these flavours that are very, very specific to the method, which is kind of brioche, biscuit, butter, really, really lovely flavours that give it a more rounded taste. Now, taste time. Good thing is you're going to get those lovely, tiny, persistent bubbles that you really, really like. It's very, very soft in the mouth, very creamy in the mouth, and that comes from that autolysis. That comes from being on the yeast for so long, and then you also get some floral and some fruity flavours going on. So you might be able to pick out kind of tart apple, almost like a Granny Smith apple, lemon, and also kind of that brioche biscuity thing. It's very, very easy drinking. And the good thing is that the acidity isn't too high. I always find when I'm having champagne that I find it to be very, very acidic. And it can be tricky to drink a decent amount of it because I always get a bit of heartburn if something's far too acidic. This is very, very easy drinking. And, you know, in terms of the quality that you're getting nowadays and the price that you're finding, in that it's extremely consistent. So yeah, I urge you, if you were put off by, you know, I know when I was a kid, people used to get Cava for a celebration, and it was always just it was a bit naff. Try it again, because producers are focusing in more on the quality of the wine, and it's fantastic. It's my go-to sparkling wine. Also, make sure that you remember that this is an old world wine. So, old world, if you weren't sure, old world is Europe. So the place where modern winemaking originated and then spread out to the rest of the world. So Spain is definitely in one of the big five, countries that I class as being old world. So there you go. I hope you enjoyed it. I really, really love Cava, and I hope you do too. So coming up next is our New World sparkling wine. So we're on to New World sparkling now, and this is from Argentina, from a region that I'm pretty sure you're going to know about. It's called Mendoza, which is probably one of the most, if not the most famous wine region in terms of the New World. It's a whopping great area. It's known as a department. It's lots of little areas inside Mendoza. So if someone says, "Oh, it's from Mendoza," it's not very specific. It's in the central western part of the country, and it's also one of the 9 great wine capitals of the world. I'll put up the other ones so you can see the other ones, and the other ones should be vaguely familiar to you. Maybe one or two aren't, but it's it's classed as being one of the great wine regions of the world. Now, the thing that sets Mendoza apart from other places that grow grapes is its altitude. It is extremely high up. we're looking at an area called Tupungato. It's up in the Andes. It's around an old volcanic cone, and it's about 1,350 meters above sea level. Ben Nevis is 1,345-ish meters above sea level. So they're essentially growing grapes on the top of Ben Nevis. So huge amount of altitude. Now up here, as you'd expect at altitude, nights are very cold. Very, very cold. But this helps to maintain the delicate fruit flavours and the aromatic flavours that you get from your white grapes. Also, you're keeping your acidity. And acidity is great in sparkling wine. If you didn't have acidity, it would be quite flabby. It would be quite boring. Acidity is needed for it to taste fresh and new. However, it's not all cold. During the day, it's very hot. There are a few reasons for that. One is that there is little or no pollution up there. It is clear as. And that means all of that wonderful UV radiation that you want to be hitting your grapevines, the leaves, it's going to be doing it. And it's going to be pushing forward photosynthesis. You're going to be making all those lovely natural sugars. And therefore you are giving the plants lots to work with in terms of producing flavours like phenolic compounds and things like that. It all goes towards boosting flavour. Now our wine is made using a particular method, very, very different to the one that is used to make Cava, but also similar. So our method is called the Charmat Lungo method. Don't worry, I'll put it up on the screen. Charmat Lungo method. Now, Charmat method is used to make Prosecco. So if we focus on that bit first, Charmat method is where you make your wine in big steel tanks. Okay, big steel tanks. So same way as you would do the Cava, but then it's slightly different. So what happens is they add some extra sugar and some extra yeast, and then they pop a lid on and they pressurize it. So you're getting secondary fermentation going on, but this time inside a tank. Inside the tank rather than in the bottle. So you're getting slightly different carbonation, slightly different way that things are interacting, different temperatures. And it's great because it means that, you're going to be retaining those fresh aromatic flavors. You don't want it to be getting too creamy or too much mouthfeel. You want acidity. You want acidity and you want fruit. So we've done that, but then we have the Lungo method. Okay, so Lungo is essentially they leave the yeast in the tank. And instead of it sitting, it kind of floats around in all of the liquid. It's different than being in a bottle. It floats around, so there is some autolysis going on. And therefore, you are producing some of those nice biscuity flavours, not as much. And you get that balance then of acidity and then also complexity. So that's the Charmat Lungo method. It's really, really interesting. It's only used in a few places around the world, but I really like it because it's kind of, you've got the old world and the new world coming together and producing something spectacular in my eyes. In terms of the grapes, it's 70% Chardonnay and 30% Viognier. Now, Chardonnay, that's where your fruit flavours are coming from. Your Viognier is where you get more of that kind of aromatic floral stuff going on. So they work really nicely as a blend, and this blend is used all over the world in different quantities, but it's used a lot because it produces really good results. Another thing is this is called extra brut. Now, brut is a term for dry, as in the amount of sugar that is in the bottle. But extra brut you think would be extra dry. No, it's actually sweeter than dry. Not very sweet. You've got about 3 grams per litre of residual sugar left in the bottle after fermentation. But just a heads up, if you're ever buying wine, just remember that extra brut doesn't mean extra dry. It means the one step up from dry. Just a little tip when you're buying. So taste-wise, balanced acidity. Balanced acidity, not too high, very, very clean. And it works fantastically well with the floral aromatic notes and the fruit. So floral on the nose, that comes from the Viognier, as I said before. And then you've got apple, that green apple. You've got citrus, like lemon. You also have a little bit of minerality from the soil. You might pick that out, almost like a wet stone kind of vibe to it. Very, very subtle though. Overall, a beautiful, fruity, easy drinking, fun, lots of persistent bubbles. It's absolutely delicious. And I'm sure you'll see a difference between that one and the Cava. So there you go. There's our first pairing. Cava versus an Argentine sparkling wine. On to number 2. Right, so wine pairing 2. We're going to be looking at Chardonnays from the Old World and the New World. Chardonnay's had a pretty tough gig in the past, basically because of poor quality, poorly oaked Chardonnays. And I asked people to reserve judgment on Chardonnay until they've tried better quality ones. We're not talking. Chardonnay is better when there's been a bit of love and a bit of care and a bit of know-how into making it really, really good. So let's have a look at wine number 1. It's a French Chardonnay from the Ardeche region. So this is one of the biggest names in French winemaking, Louis Latour. They've been set up in Burgundy, which is where they first started, in a place called Cotes, and they've been going since the 1760s. So they've got real pedigree in terms of their wine. So they're technically slightly outside of Burgundy in the Ardeche. It's to the south. And it's actually classed as the southern Rhone valley, as it's close to the Rhone River. And now the hills of the region tend to run diagonally, so from north to east and south to west. And this creates a number of valleys throughout the region. And the vineyards occupy the kind of the lower slopes and the valley bottoms, so not on really steep valleys in this kind of area. Now, Louis Latour buys from multiple growers in and around this area and then blends them together. But the important thing is he's taking high quality grapes from low yield vineyards. In terms of the winemaking itself, the wine spends about 8 to 10 months in French oak barrels. And there it undergoes malolactic fermentation. Now, malolactic fermentation sounds difficult, but in a nutshell, you are taking an acid that you find in the wine called malic acid. And you find this, the best way you can actually taste what it tastes like in green apples. So, like I was saying before, Granny Smiths, they are a prime example of what malic acid tastes like. And you're converting malic acid to lactic acid. Now, if you're a runner, you might have heard of lactic acid. That's what builds up when you start running and your legs get tired and things like that. Lactic acid, but also lactic acid has a particular flavour, a buttery flavour. It's present in butter and things like that. It's a buttery flavour, which really, really makes Chardonnay taste a bit more complex, but without the oak aspect to it. So this wine is blended. 80% of the wine is in oak. Okay, now when people hear oak, they automatically go ooh, but you've just got to remember that oak imparts lots of new and interesting flavours to wines, and if oak is done badly, and more often than not in the cheaper wines, when wine tastes oaked, they chop up old barrels and put them into the tanks. And the thing is, this isn't subtle, gentle oaking. This is slapdash, do it as fast as possible because there's a higher surface area. And it means that you're going to be getting bitter flavours coming from it instead of those classic kind of vanilla-y flavours, the vanilla, spice, all those things that come from new oak barrels. Now, I said 80%. They also use 20% of just fresh young wine as well, to put it in there to give it a bit of a boost and a bit of an acidity kick as well. Now, tasting wise, this really does kind of a punch above its weight in terms of its price. So it's a creamy white wine, and when I mean creamy, I don't mean it's actual cream, but it kind of coats your mouth and it feels fuller. It's got more body to it. It definitely is crisp and light as well, so it finds a balance between the two, but it's got lots of depth in there and character and a wonderful finish, so it lasts in your mouth a long time. So you're going to be getting lemon and apple and acacia flowers on the nose. And then on the palate, you're getting buttery brioche vanilla from the oak and from the malolactic fermentation, but also honey and apple and peach and lovely fresh fruit flavours. It's a fabulous wine. For the price, it's ridiculously good value because it gives you an idea of how well done oaked Chardonnay can be done, and you're not paying Burgundy prices for this. You're paying, more New World prices in terms of its oak Chardonnay. So I hope you like it, and if you weren't into Chardonnay before, I hope it's kind of given you a better idea of what you can get in terms of oak Chardonnay. So let's have a look at the New World one now. Okay, so New World, and when I mean New World, I mean outside of Europe, and we go into South America, to Chile. And to visiting Europeans, Chile seems fairly comforting in terms of its culture, because it has a Spanish-leaning culture, but also geographically, it's the essence of isolation. With the kind of Andes, which are a bit inhospitable. To the east, you've got Pacific Ocean to the west, and the Atacama Desert to the north, Antarctica to the south. So it has all of these extremes at different parts. This has given Chile's vineyards the distinction of being largely unaffected by phylloxera. That's a louse that affects the roots of the vines. And vines can be safely grown, and they don't need to spend time and money grafting on different rootstocks, or using pesticides and things like that. It's largely untouched. Now, in terms of climate, Chile has a kind of a reliable, almost Mediterranean climate. Dry, day after day of uninterrupted sunshine, and also you get a lot of imported European grapes, so Chardonnay, Sauvignon Blanc, Merlot, things like that, make it an absolute kind of mecca for wine production. Hey, it's not all sunshine and unicorns. Its summers are virtually rainless. Okay, there's no rain, which isn't great. It isn't great. They've got some workarounds. They dig gullies from the Andes and from higher areas, so that the melt from glacial waters can run down and they can irrigate the vineyards. So Chardonnay is a chameleon grape in terms of its flavours, and it's very much affected by where it's grown, how it's grown, and how the wine is treated. The Chilean Chardonnay, it shows similar characteristics to Sauvignon Blanc. In terms of high acidity, more tropical fruit flavours, and kind of an apple pear citrus thing going on with it. So different to our French one, which is more on the citrus side, a little bit more restrained. This is also slightly oaked, so there is a point of similarity between the two. It's slightly oaked for about 8 months, so we're getting these gorgeous buttery notes, we're getting that vanilla, we're getting those essential oak flavours from there. It also lends that rounder, creamy mouthfeel, which we got from the French, and a nice length. So in terms of the differences, the great thing is that you can just compare the terroir. So terroir is, as I was saying, those specific conditions that alter the flavour of a grape. So Chardonnay from France and Chardonnay from Chile, hopefully you can see the difference between the two. You may also have spotted that part of the name of the wine is Gran Reserva. Now, Gran Reserva in Spain means something completely different to Gran Reserva in other Spanish-speaking countries. Gran Reserva in Chile means more that it's their vineyard is kind of broken up into different parts, and they believe this is the best part of their vineyard. So it's got nothing to do with quality. It's not it's that their quality standards are different to France in terms of how they regulate it. So Gran Reserva doesn't necessarily indicate quality, but it indicates quality, at least in terms of the winemakers, in their own vineyard. And Carmen are a very, very good producer. They've been around since the start of Chilean winemaking. So if they call something Gran Reserva, then I would say that it's going to be higher quality and a better wine overall. This wine is from the Casablanca Valley. Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn.
Flatly, my dear, I don't river dance. Give a damn.
It's between Santiago and Valparaiso. So Santiago inland, Valparaiso on the coast. And it's synonymous with Chilean white wine. It was thought to be too cold to grow good grapes. But in the 80s, they put them on these kind of really interesting vertical trellises to get them away from the ground, the cooler ground, and get the most sun exposure. Now, as I was saying before, in terms of the meltwater, in terms of irrigation, the valley's a bit too far inland from the Andes to get that meltwater. So what they've done is been very clever, and they've dug kind of boreholes to access the groundwater, and then use that to irrigate their vines as well. It's an ingenious way of growing in a very, very dry country. And hopefully this reflects on the wines themselves, that, you know, the love and the care and the use of their terrain hopefully goes towards making a really, really good quality Chardonnay. Plus, it's close enough to the coast to get some lovely cooling breezes. This is why Casablanca Valley produces some amazing, crisp, dry, aromatic white wines. Right, let's get on to the tasting, shall we? What we should be thinking in terms of this Chardonnay is tropical fruit. It's unbelievably tropical fruit, which is why I kind of compared it to Sauvignon Blanc, because Sauvignon Blanc also has these tropical fruit flavours going on in there. So on the nose, so giving it a sniff, it's always pineapple and mango with this one. There's some lemon as well on the nose, and also you can smell the oak, you can smell the vanilla involved. When you taste it, you know it's full-bodied. It's got that lovely, creamy, buttery mouthfeel. It coats the inside of your mouth. And then when in the tasting, I mean, you're getting those tropical fruit. You're getting those kind of citrusy elements, which you get with Chardonnays in general. But I get a kind of almost like a caramel butterscotch flavour going on in there as well. It's beautifully balanced. It's quite alcoholic as well. I mean, it's about 13.9% or almost 14%. So it's a pretty boozy Chardonnay. You generally don't find them that high. But you wouldn't know. You wouldn't know that it had that amount of alcohol in there. I absolutely love it. And it's a wonderful example of expertise when using oak. Get the balance between the fruit and the oak. And it's just a really, really good drink. I more often than not, when I pick up a Chardonnay, I will go for Chilean ones. Not only because they're excellent value, but also they have the flavours that I like. They have those beautiful subtle oak notes, but also they've got tropical fruit, which, in wines is really, really lovely, and they pair particularly well with nice tropical flavours. So yeah, like mango salads and things like that. I really get on top of them. I'm genuinely hoping that if you weren't a fan of Chardonnay before this, then this might be a turning point. You might have a taste and go, oh, you know what? Not everything is Jacob's Creek Chardonnay. There is a massive variety in terms of the way that Chardonnay can be approached. We had 2 oaked versions, but you can get really, really young, vibrant Chardonnays that haven't seen a whiff of oak, and you wouldn't even recognise them because, like I said, most people's experience with them have been on the poor side. So there we go. Those were our old world and new world Chardonnays. I hope you enjoyed them, and we'll move on to wine pairing number 3. So now we're on to red wine in the old world, and one of them most well known, kind of ground zero really for red wines in the old world, is Bordeaux. Now, Bordeaux's known for its blended red wine, so it's not just one grape, there are multiple grapes going into this. So you may have heard of certain areas like Medoc, Haut-Medoc, Margaux, Pomerol, Saint-Emilion, Grave, to name but a few. And these are areas that get a huge amount of attention. But what you don't see are areas that get less attention. They still produce good quality wines, which quite a lot of the local population drink, and a few kind of sneak over to see us as well. And if the local population like them, and we know how fussy the French can be, it's gonna be good wine. It's gonna be good wine. It's not going to be massively complex, but it's going to be very fruit forward, and interesting and great with food. Now, the wine we have, the Chateau Fontblanche, from the Blaye region, spelt B-L-A-Y-E-S, but pronounced Blaye. I didn't know much about it, to be honest. I had to go and have a bit of a look. And it's up in the hills, and it dominates the kind of Gironde estuary. So you've got your hills, and there's some different kind of soils in and around there. So you do find a really good variation in terms of the grapes that they grow. So to the north, they have sandy and gravelly soils, which are really good for Sauvignon Blanc. And then in the west of the Appellation, around the town of Blaye, which the name, the Côte de Blaye, comes from. The soils are predominantly clay limestone, so very different, but they give the Merlot grape variety to reveal its kind of aromatic chops, so to speak. If we look at the grapes that they use in the Bordeaux region, you've got the kind of the three granddaddies. So the ones that are used the most, and that's Merlot, Cabernet Sauvignon, and Cabernet Franc. And then you've got your other mates in there that are used a little more sparingly. So Petit Verdot, Malbec, yes, Malbec. Not just an Argentinian thing, it originates in France and they still grow it. And Carmen, and you might have heard of that grape from Chile. So again, these aren't grown as widely as they are in the New World, but they are there and they are used sparingly to boost blends and to add interesting characteristics to blends. So as I mentioned, our Chateau Fontblanche is dominated by Merlot, but it also has Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet Franc, and Malbec involved in it. So this blend produces a soft, round, and well-balanced wine. It's seen about 12 months of oak as well, which is unusual in some of these more fruit-forward, meant to be drunk young. It has seen some oak. So hence why it's so smooth. Oak smooths out tannins, so that's another thing that oak does, as well as imparting flavour. It also changes the composition of wine. It smooths out the tannins, makes it less spiky on the palate, is the best way I can describe it. It's packed with fruit, nothing too complex, so lots of kind of red fruit and things like that. It's intense, it's vibrant, so there's plums in there, there's kind of your raspberries, your classic raspberry, maybe a bit of strawberry in there as well, but nothing too massively complex. It's not one of those wines, and it's not meant to be. You're not meant to chew over it, you're meant to have a good quaff and enjoy it. For the price, it's sensational. You won't get a wine like this for that price, usually. It's under 10 quid, which, you can't really go wrong with that. And we do well to take a leaf out of the French book. Things don't always have to be massively rich and dense. You can have something that is just for drinking, rather than to impress or for special occasions. Drink it with, in terms of food, there's very, very simple dishes. So obviously meat is always good with red wine, but you can have lighter meats, almost white meats with it, and it would work perfectly nicely. Lots of grilled veggies and things like that. It's going to be good. So that's our old world blended red. Let's have a look at our new world blended red, and this one will be a bit of a surprise to you, I hope. New World blend this time, red blend. It's this time it's dominated by Cabernet Sauvignon, so there's more Cabernet Sauvignon involved rather than with our old world, which was Merlot. There's also there's Merlot in there, of course. It's a Bordeaux blend, and there's some Petit Verdot in there as well. We'll definitely see a difference because of that kind of differential in terms of how much of each grape is in there. From our French Bordeaux blend. Now we're going to South Africa. It's quite weird to think of them doing a Bordeaux blend, but for some reason people are slightly reticent about going for South African wines in general. Maybe because they don't know much about the country and its regions. Maybe because they're more familiar with its most famous white grape, which is Chenin Blanc, or it's red, which is indigenous really to the country. It's a hybrid, it's a Pinotage. And a lot of people don't like Pinotage, and they immediately think that a lot of South African reds are very dark, very tannic, they're almost like Marmite wines, but they are able to produce blended reds with a great amount of finesse and touch to them. And this is definitely one of those. So let's smooth out all of our preconceptions right now. We're on the Western Cape of South Africa. I'll show you maps and images so you can get a kind of idea, because it's a massive, massive country with a really, really big, widely varied growing regions in there. We're going to Stellenbosch, probably the most famous of all of them. It's the hub of the Cape in terms of wine activity. So fine wine is made in a wider range now. We're going from Walker Bay, which is further south, and all the way up through Swartland to Lutzville and Orange, which is even further north. So we're focusing in on Stellenbosch wine. This is where the greatest concentration of winemakers are based, and there's very, very varied geography, soils, and overall terroir. But it can be dangerous to associate a winery's terroir to the flavour and quality of their vines. So many of these producers get their grapes from lots of different parts and then they blend, and that's the art behind blending. I didn't want to mention this in the old world part, but I'll do it in the new world. That's the art, because if you think about it, if they're off by just a little bit, there won't be any balance, any coherence to it. It can just not be quite right, and it takes real skill to get those exact dimensions in there. That a little bit more of this grape, a little bit more of that grape, and then it all comes together into something really quite fabulous. So our Lanzerac, and that's the name of the producer, our Lanzerac blend is made in the Jonkershuk Valley, so really, really close to the actual town of Stellenbosch, which is a beautiful leafy university town. So essentially, it's a big, long kind of valley that runs down. It's at the mouth of the valley where it has the best suited grape growing conditions. So south-facing slopes, so you're getting lots of sun, lots and lots of sun. You always get more sun on those south-facing slopes. But also they're quite a bit cooler than the surrounding area of Stellenbosch, because you get a strong eastern wind which kind of funnels down that valley. So even though it's baking hot, you do have that cooling influence from the wind. So the soils are deep red clay, and clay is great because it retains moisture and it helps to keep it cool. So, you know, baking hot, but there are elements in the geography and in the terrain which helps to keep it cool. And keeping cool is great for growing red grapes because it lengthens the ripening time. And if you're lengthening the ripening time, it means you're concentrating flavours, more intense flavour. You know, if the ripening time's shorter, you're not going to be producing as many sugars. You're not going to be producing as many different flavour compounds, aromatic compounds for the nose and flavour compounds. So you're getting really bold and well-developed reds from this region. So let's have a taste. I mean, you're going to be getting fruit in there. Darker fruit this time. Darker fruit. Black plum, black cherry, cassis, blackcurrant. Almost prunes on an aftertaste. There's oak involved, so you're getting vanilla, you're getting spice, tobacco. On the nose, I find it a little bit smoky, which isn't unpleasant. You know, I really like smoke in wine as long as it's not too overpowering. If there's a little hint there, it's actually really pleasant. Now, in terms of its actual, the parts that make a whole, it is a very acidic wine. You know, the fruit can sometimes kind of mask it, but there is very high acidity and very high alcohol. I mean, 15% alcohol. It's a very strong boy. It's not for the faint of heart. The body is very full, and it has a big, long finish, with almost a chocolatey finish with strong tannin. So it does follow some of the preconceptions that people do have about South African wine, but this is so much more. It has so much more going for it, and I hope you really enjoy it. But that's just to show that there is just a massive difference in terms of old world and new world approaches to their Bordeaux blends, and you'll find this throughout whatever pairing that you're doing. So, done. Okay, pairing 4. We're looking at Primitivo here. So Primitivo is an Italian red wine. It's from Puglia, which is in the heel of the country. And it's very, very hot down there. It's very, very hot. In terms of terroir, you've got that kind of hot Mediterranean climate. You've got your kind of persistent sunshine for a lot of the growing season, but also you've got ocean breezes because it's surrounded on kind of 2 sides, almost 3 sides by ocean. It's kind of a little finger of land that comes out, and it means it's perfect for growing this particular grape, Primitivo. Now, Puglia always produced red wines. It's indigenous variety, so there's the big one, which is Negramaro, and there's Primitivo. And what they used to grow them like was they used to grow massive amounts, pretty low quality, but very high alcohol. And they were used for blending with other wines to kind of boost alcohol content and boost body. But, the quality was pretty poor. But, late 20th century, people are way more interested in quality over quantity. So they had to change their approach. I mean, you can get good quality wines from the New World at much more affordable prices. So they had to change tact because it was dying a death. And in the 90s, something else helped. The EU, the European Union, introduced a scheme called the Vine Pull Scheme. Europe was being flooded with a high volume of low quality wine which they couldn't sell and was going off and was having to be stored. This isn't great in terms of economic terms. So what they did was offer incentives to lots of countries, but Italy in particular, in the south of Italy, to pull up their vines, and they got paid for it, obviously. And the ones that were left were more carefully managed, and the quality levels bumped up. So let's look at where our wine is actually grown. It's grown in a commune called Manduria. And so you'll be seeing Manduria if you're looking for Primitivo. Also another one which you might spot is Salento. But Manduria is it's a beautiful place. It's a very ancient part of the world, and it shares the land with endless olive groves as well. So that's its main export. It's responsible for almost half of Italy's annual production of olive oil. It's also a key DOC. So DOC, which stands for Denominazione di Origine Controllata. Don't need to look too much into that, but basically it's a quality system that means that the area and the methods are very, very specific, and they have to be followed for them to have that name on there, Manduria. It means that you know what you're getting when you see it on the label. Manduria got its papers for this in 1974, so it's the oldest DOC in Puglia. Now, a fact, Primitivo got its name because it ripens early. So when people hear Primitivo, they think it's primitive, or, because it is quite a robust wine. It's quite robust. Primitive, might think it's basic, but it's definitely not that. What it means is early. So early ripening. Just to show that it's not a one-off, if you think of Rioja and the grape that they use there, Tempranillo, it means exactly the same thing. It means early, so early ripening, which is very, very important for this, because it has it starts to build up those intensity of flavors. If you've got your grape ripening early and you stretch it out over a growing season, it's going to be intensifying those flavors. As part of the standards that we talked about, it has to have a minimum final alcohol content of 13.5%. It has to have that for it to be passed as a Manduria. There's also, it's got the highest minimum alcohol level, requirement of any appellation for dry, unfortified wine in the world. Okay? Now that's a massive thing, in terms of, there are lots of countries that limit the alcohol content, but this is the highest in the world without fortification, like ports and sherries. So let's look at the wine itself. Primitivo generally, they produce inky, kind of tannic wines. So inky in terms of the colour, very dark, inky, purpley looking wines are generally full-bodied with a touch of sweetness to them. Massively ripe fruit, so things almost jamminess involved there. So plum, baked figs, cherry. There's black pepper spice in there as well. Cocoa, and it's a really pretty rich and full-bodied wine. It's a great food wine as well. I would say sometimes, these full-bodied wines can be a little much on their own, but if you have them with, char-grilled meats and veggies, they go really, really nicely. Burgers, I find, go really nice. In particular, because some Primitivos exhibit earthy character, and this one definitely does. From my tasting notes, I definitely got a smokiness from the wine. The palate, it's not actually very acidic. It's a medium acidity, obviously high alcohol, but it doesn't actually taste too strong on that front. Alcohol's, wine with high alcohol can be what we call a hot wine. You actually feel the alcohol content going down the gullet. But in this case, it's not too bad, but you definitely feel it after a large glass. It does have kind of those strong flavours, but very rounded, almost like a velvety texture. So it's not unpleasant, even though it is quite robust. And it does have some sweetness too. Sweeter than quite a lot of dry red wines. I wouldn't say it was a dry red wine. It's got about 10 grams per litre in terms of sweetness. And the ripeness of the fruit as well kind of add to this sweet character. All the fruits that I mentioned and that spice, plus some, pepper, cloves, nutmeg, and that earthiness as well. And last thing is, obviously you've maybe poured it out already, but this wine gets better after you've decanted. So pour a bit out, let some oxygen get to it. Some of the harshness will be taken off of the wine, and you get some of those lovely velvety characteristics that you get. So there we go. That was a little bit about Primitivo. I hope you enjoyed it. It's a wine that doesn't get a look in quite a lot, but it's starting to now. A lot of wine writers are starting to pay a bit more attention to it. Primitivo was originally brought across from Croatia. It went from Croatia, where it was a native wine, native grape called Tribodrag, or oh god, this is where I really kill it in terms of my Croatian things. It's Kielnak Kastelanski, one of the two. Yeah, it's the same grape. But it made its way across. Immigrants into the south of Italy brought that across, and that was Primitivo. But then it found its way to the USA. I'm sorry, what? Turns out Primitivo is Zinfandel. So if you've heard of Zinfandel, Primitivo, it's the same grape. This happens all throughout the wine world. Shiraz is Syrah, Grenache is Garnacha. Countries put their own spin on it based on their language. That's perfectly fine. Now, no one is really sure who took it over to the US. There's plenty of theories floating around, but we know it's probably in and around the 1830s where it got there. Now, Zinfandel has gotten a bad rap in terms of the wine that is produced, because, as you know, white Zinfandel, a rosé, is made from the grapes, and they pump it out like nobody's business. Big jugs of the stuff, of pretty poor quality, fairly sweet, not very complex wines. But that's okay. If you like that, that is fine. But the problem is that the grape now is being associated with that, and not with its red wines, which can be as interesting and complex and delicious as any of the other old world varieties. Zinfandel is pretty much almost always grown in California. That's where you're going to get most of your Zinfandel, because the terroir and the climate really, really lend itself to it. I won't go too much into California because it is a massive, massive, massive wine region, and it's a separate video on its own. I'm looking at my notes right in front of me, and I've got some stats for you in terms of California. So the wine country is the most popular wine country. Sonoma, which is where our wine is from, and Napa Valley is north of San Francisco. north of San Francisco, and it's a kind of a scenic route. There are 800 wineries along this scenic route that takes in Napa, Sonoma, Paso Robles, and Russian River Valley. Those are 4 biggies. And they have 136 viticulture areas, with all the well-known varietals. So Chardonnay, Sauvignon, Pinot Noir, Zinfandel, Riesling, Syrah. And this is because of how diverse the growing conditions are in California. You've got inland, you've got coastal, you've got mountains, you've got slopes, you've got flats, you've got fog, you've got rain, which means that all of those varietals you're able to grow in some way or another. Riesling doesn't do well in hot climate, but there are parts of California that are able to grow them. So Sonoma, where some of the grapes were sourced for our Avalon Zinfandel, they source from Sonoma and places like Lodi nearby, and it's got an amazing history, this area. So you've got the Franciscan missionaries came over and they planted vineyards in 1823. The first European varietals arrived in 1857. Pinot Noir vines were planted in 53, and are possibly some of the oldest in the US. And so Sonoma is an AVA. I said all of those areas. They're known as AVAs, American Viticulture Areas. And it works really nicely with Zinfandel because, it's cooled from the north and the south. There's nice winds blowing in from the north and the south. But it stays warm in the middle. It's a late ripening. It's an early ripening grape because it is Primitivo, yeah? So a long growing season is perfect. It's needed. You don't want continuous warm for your Californian one. You want that diurnal variation that I've spoken about before, warm days, cool nights. And that way, you're lengthening the growing time, and it means that you get those, you maintain some acidity, but you get those awesome ripe flavours in your fruit. Soil makes a difference. Zinfandel is subject to bunch rot, which is when you get a lot of grapes to the vine. You're getting these big bunches, and that means that some grapes are going to be on the inside of there, and you start to get kind of fungus growing on there. I picked some grapes the other year from my mum's, and they had those same type bunches. And some of the inside grapes weren't doing particularly well. They were fairly small, and you need to control your yield and able to kind of stop this. It produces a lot of fruit when it's under stress. The plant, the grapevine. So sandy soils in that kind of Californian river delta mean that they're well draining, and there's less stress. There's less water stress on the vine, so you get better grape distribution. So let's have a look at the flavours compared to Primitivo. I'd say generally Zinfandels, especially US Zinfandels, have a more fruit forward approach, a lot jammier. Big juicy fruit you should be getting from this. So plum, blackcurrant, black cherry I got from this one in particular, and that distinctive sweetness that you get from the grape. You get it in the Primitivo too, but in this one you definitely get a distinctive sweetness from there. Prunes and raisins, so almost dried fruit, and the tannins that you have in the wine are almost masked in terms of all of that big, ripe, juicy fruit. There's definitely spice. It's a characteristic of the grape in general. Pepper and baking spices, the same as Primitivo. This one has seen some good oak. So there's chocolate and vanilla in there. Very smooth, very velvety, but nowhere near as earthy as the Primitivo. You can definitely see the difference in terms of the earthiness. It's a little bit less robust, lower alcohol content. It's still high, but not as high as the Manduria. And yeah, I mean, it's, again, Zinfandel is one that it's starting to come more into trend. People are looking for sweeter reds, sweeter wines in general. Really, the dryness in reds is something that people are slowly coming away from. But delicious, medium acidity, great body, great finish, and again, a wonderful food wine. A wonderful, wonderful food wine. Same kind of deal with the Primitivo, you know, grilling, barbecue, summer wine. Also very warming as well. So I can drink it in the summer and get that lovely warmth going on in there. You know, with stews and kind of beef stews and things like that. I generally find it works quite nicely. Okay, and our last pairing, it's a battle of the blends again. So this will be interesting as they're the same grapes used for each. You know, one's old world, one's new, and hopefully we'll see some difference and explore some possible reasons. So we go into the Rhone Valley for our old world. So Rhone Valley, France, obviously. You know, it's got a very, very diverse portfolio in terms of the types of wines that it makes. You know, they vary from intensely concentrated, darker colour, tannic, to simple but solid wine. The best have depth and, even more important, harmony. Now, the vineyards around the Rhone Valley, they fall naturally into two groups, the north and the south. You know, the north has less than 1/10 of the production of the south, but almost all of them are fine wines. The south is much more diverse. The north is dominated by the Syrah grape, the south Grenache. You know, as the Rhone River courses through from Switzerland through France, the country changes, the landscape changes. So in the north of the Rhone Valley, you've got more oak forests. Then in the south, it kind of rolls through to herbal scrub and olive groves, similar to Provence. It's a very, very marked difference. The rainfall is different. You know, you're getting way more in the north. It's very lush and green, whereas it's quite dry and arid further in the south. It's more of a Mediterranean climate going on. So we're just going to be talking reds here. The Rhone Valley does have whites. You know, quite a lot of native grapes. You know, Marsanne, Roussanne, and Viognier are the three biggies. They do varietals and they also do blends. So we're focusing in on the south of the Rhone Valley. So Grenache. That's what I think. When someone says southern Rhone grape, I think Grenache. And more often than not, they are going to be blended with Syrah and also with another varietal, Mourvèdre. So these vines in the south, they lay kind of almost baking on very broad terraces of smooth round stones. These stones are warmed by the sun. You know, it's a beautiful, beautiful part of the world. I've never been. I would really love to go to the Rhone Valley, in particular the south. You know, the centerpiece of the southern Rhone area is Châteauneuf-du-Pape. So Châteauneuf-du-Pape is the wine, and also it's the region. And I think that's probably what it's best known for. It's premier wine, Châteauneuf-du-Pape. You know, and this area is surrounded by lots of little communes, little communities that produce something called Côte de Rhône. So Côte de Rhône is a generic term, and you know, it's something from in and around that region. Côte meaning coast. Some, however, have earned the right to have their own name, their own appellation. The name of our wine is a little bit deceiving because it's called Vacqueyras Cave de Gigondas. So in terms of deciphering that, Cave de Gigondas is the name of the producer. So they're based in Gigondas, but they have places that they produce in and around that Châteauneuf-du-Pape region. So ours is Vacqueyras. So this is a Vacqueyras. It's Vacqueyras got its own kind of appellation status in 1990, so it's pretty young, but it's one of the older ones in and around there. It's south of Gigondas. You'll see all of this on the map. It has beautiful rolling hills, and the soils are sandy, stony, with some clay and some limestone. It provides a very good, rich character to the wine, and good drainage as well. So the stones that I was talking about, those warm, round stones, they kind of retain heat during the day. Like a battery, almost. That's the way I think of them, almost like a battery, storing heat, and then they release that heat at night so that the wines don't get too cold, because it can get a little bit chilly. One of the reasons people love wines from this region are they are approachable, and the prices are generally pretty good, even for a named appellation in and around the South Rhone. So the AOC rules, so the AOC is the quality standard thing, Vacqueyras AOC, mean that Vacqueyras must be made from at least 50% Grenache. So 50% of the bottle that you'll have in front of you is Grenache, and at least 20% must be Syrah or Mourvèdre. Okay, so for the tasting, I always recommend these wines for people if they aren't sure about what they want, but they like things that are smooth and good with food. Smooth and fruity. These are two buzzwords that come up all the time: smooth and fruity. So a generally wide description, it's smooth and fruity, but there's also spice there and rustic herbal touches. So red and black fruits, it all depends on the producer, but there's red and black fruits. They're perfumed, they're aromatic on the nose. So blackberries, plums, black cherry. I always get things like strawberry from Southern Rhone wines. And then you get that lovely spice. Very specific. It's usually white pepper. And this is coming from its Grenache. It's dominant Grenache. I always get almost like a white pepper, and if you don't ever have white pepper, a lot of people just have black pepper. White pepper's a very specific flavour, and I'd suggest if you do like Southern Rhones, try and get some white pepper and just sprinkle a little bit on something and get that flavour. It's subtle, but a lot of Southern Rhone wines have an aroma that is savoury and herbal at the same time. This is called garrigue, or garrigue, but I call it garrigue. This isn't something that many people know, but they pick up on the flavours, the herbal, savoury elements, but the garrigue is actually from the plants that grow in and around the vineyards. It's like scrubland. It stands for the scrubland in France. It's a certain plant community that grows in and around the vines, and I'll try and find an image that shows you the garrigue kind of a scrub that grow around them. It's very, very prevalent in the south of France, and you will see them in between the rows. They all add to the terroir of the wines. It's something that's very subtle, but if I get hold of a South Rhone, I know it's a South Rhone because I get that white pepper and I get that garrigue as well. It's a robust, it's strong, it's pretty rich, but it's very pleasant, very balanced, which people like. There's acidity and there's also fruit, and it's got that lovely rusticness that it's fantastic with food. So the last of the wines in our pairings, it's a New World wine. It's got a slightly different blend to the Vacqueyras. So this one is a Shiraz-dominated one. So Shiraz and Grenache. So we should be expecting some different flavours in the blend. And also based on where it's from, which is Straya. Possibly the most well-known area, the Barossa Valley. So the Barossa Valley is north of Adelaide, in the heartland of its fine wine production. It's got its, I say warm and dry. It's hot and dry. They've got old vines there that produce outstanding Shiraz, Grenache, Cabernet Sauvignon, and Mottura, which is the New World way of saying Mourvèdre, which we've seen in our previous. Recently there's been a real wave of Mediterranean grapes making their way. So they've got Sangiovese, Tempranillo, Fiano, and lots more, because they're really well suited to Australian growing conditions. It's got a Mediterranean climate, but it's got hot, dry summers. Hot, dry summers, as you'd expect. But in terms of the temperatures in the region, it's a real spread. And I'll put up a heat map that someone made of the Barossa region. You can see there's a real variation between all of the temperatures in the region. It's almost makes little sub-regions, not only based on the temperature, but also on the soils. So we're talking, from sand to heavy black clay, well-drained red-brown clay, poorly drained yellow and grey. Overall, there's such a massive amount of difference in terms of terroir. But what we do know is that they overall have a really, really low amount of fertility in terms of the soil, which could sound like a bad thing, but in terms of vines love, being treated mean, keep them keen, because then they put all of their resources into their fruit. That aside, what you're going to be getting from this region are huge, big, bombastic, fruity, full-bodied wines. Barossa wines are influenced by lots of different things. Also, the local flora. So flora like local plant life. The archetypal tree in Australia is eucalyptus. And eucalyptus has that menthol kind of vibe to it, and you will pick that up in Australian wines, in particular the Shirazes. The Shirazes, if you give me a Shiraz, I kind of know that it is from Australia because of that menthol finish. It's not, like eating a cough sweet. It's subtle, but it is there, that herbality. A very cool fact in terms of that area is that it has some of the oldest vines in the world, about 100 years old, which is, really, really old. But the ones that we're dealing with in terms of our wine, the Magpie Estate Scoundrel, they're only 35 years old. So they're youngsters in terms of, but they're pretty old vines, considering that after 3 years you can start production of grape. 35 years, these are well established. These are well established vines, and the fruit for this wine have been sourced from low yielding, so not a massive amount of grapes on the vine. Low yielding Shiraz and Grenache. They're both hand and machine harvested, and in terms of the makeup of the wine, we've got about 60% Shiraz and about 40% Grenache. So different as opposed to our Vacqueyras, which was Grenache, Shiraz, and Mourvèdre. Oak has been used, and the interesting thing with the way they have gone about it is that they've used two different kinds of oak for the two different grapes in the blend, which I thought was really, really interesting. So the Shiraz have used American oak, and the Grenache has been put in French oak, about 14 months for each one. Now, does that make a difference? What's the difference between the two? Well, there is a difference in terms of what they impart to the wine. So you've got French oak, much more subtle, and it a lot less of flavors, strong flavors of oak coming into here, but they kind of help to produce firmer, silkier tannins. So they've used that for the Shiraz, and I'm just going off the top of my head because I've been learning about the differences between the oak styles. Shiraz, it's very bolshy, big. And the tannins can be, quite spiky at times, but the French mellows them out a bit, makes them a bit, like I said, silkier, so the tannins are well integrated. Now, American oak is on the other side, and you can almost think of it in terms of a cultural thing as well. Americans are a lot more brash, imparts more obvious, stronger and oak flavours and aromas. So that's been given to the Grenache just to give it a bit of a boost, because Grenache is a little bit lighter and very fruity and juicy. So the oak flavours that have gone into that are a little bit stronger. So you can see they're thinking about their blend. They're producing something that has had a lot of thought put into it and a lot of subtlety as well. Now, tasting wise, it's a big wine. This is. It's got slaps of dark fruit from the Shiraz, so blackberry, blackcurrant, blueberry. There's red fruit from the Grenache, strawberry, raspberry, all wonderfully ripe and rich, delicious fruit flavours. And then obviously there's some spice in there too. So you've got that white pepper from the Grenache. You've got that eucalyptus, as I said before, based on the surrounding area. You always find that in Australian wines. And then you've got the oak flavours. So you've got your vanilla and you've got your chocolatey vibes going on in there. So really complex for something of this price. Overall, it's a full-bodied, fruity, tangy, but with a plush kind of smooth outcome to it. It's an absolute belter. It's a really good seller for us, and I'm sure you can see why, because it's massively good value for money for something with this depth and complexity to it. And hopefully you can see the difference between this one and the Old World. Based on the dominating grape. So this one's Shiraz, and then you've got the Grenache. But hopefully you enjoyed them and you can see a difference between the two in terms of Old World and New World. So there we have it, folks. Our 5 different pairings of between Old World and New World, and the ones that you have, I hope you really enjoyed them and you got something out of this. The flexibility of the format was really nice as well. If you have had one pairing and you like doing it, then the great thing is this video is going to be up for you for in perpetuity. It's going to be here for the whole amount of time. But that's great. It means that, when you have a little bit of spare money and you want to get some nice wine in, try some of the other pairings. If people are interested in trying some different pairings, different grape varieties that you want to compare and contrast, let us know. Contact us on all of our social media platforms, drop us an email, and let us know. We are open to things. I'm going to do one for a private tasting, which will be French Sauvignon and New Zealand Sauvignon. So that's just because someone wasn't particularly fond of Chardonnay, but that's cool. I'm more than happy to do that. So I suppose the thing to leave you with is take care of yourselves. Hit up Bottles Wine Bar and Merchant's website, so bottleswineshop.co.uk. Support your independence, whether it be with your wine, your beer, your spirits, your food. Try and keep things going. Hopefully we can come out of this very soon, and stay safe. Okay, much love. Ciao for now.